Today I'm going to be unpacking self-abandonment, which is the underlying pattern that is responsible for why you keep attracting unhealthy or toxic relationships and why you get stuck in patterns like codependency, insecure attachment, having no boundaries, or experiencing anxiety or depression. Feeling this is a game changer and a turning point in your relationship to yourself and others. And stick around to the end because I will show you how to do that. And if you're new here, welcome. My name is Amy and I help women who feel stuck in patterns of self-abandonment that keep attracting them toxic relationships to heal their trauma and learn the discipline of self-love so they can be free to be their true authentic self. And if you'd like more content on this topic, please click the subscribe button, hit the notification bell so you get notified when I post new lessons every week. Now, before I begin, Heal Your Heart School is open for enrollment. So if you'd like to know more about how to apply for that, make sure you stick around to the end. So first, let's unpack, if you've never heard of the term self-abandonment, let's look at what it is. Effectively, it's patterns, beliefs, behaviors, or thoughts that ignore yourself and parts of yourself in favor for another person, either connecting with them, meeting their needs, or serving them in some way. Effectively, you're kind of just being really superficial with yourself and you're operating from this kind of false mask you put on in order to connect in the way that you think the other person wants to connect with you, and you're not actually connected to yourself whilst doing that. So you're effectively not showing up for yourself in your relationships and your life. And the way we do this is subconscious. We fragment a part of ourselves in order to do that. We kind of leave that part at the door, so to speak, in order to get validation or acceptance or approval from that person or job or relationship, whatever it might be. So this is going to manifest in dating when you are more focused on whether they like you rather than you being focused on you liking them, right? So if we're hyper focused on trying to get their approval, trying to get their validation when dating, we're actually ignoring the part of us that needs to be discerning whether they're appropriate for us or not. You might notice when you're dating, when you're on a date, that you kind of feel outside of yourself. It's like you're hyper focused on what the other person is saying, what they're doing. Now, this can be a really natural response to get into, and it can be a part of dating, but it's really important to be aware of it when it's happening, because the other process we need to have is we need to be in our body and acknowledge whether we actually like a person or not, and not be continually self-abandoning in this way. So you might do or say things to impress them, or you might mask up. You might have like this pretend personality when you're with that person. You're not actually showing up and being yourself, and that can be really problematic because this is a person you're actually potentially going to be creating a healthy relationship with, and if you're not being authentic from the start, they're not getting a chance to see and love the real you. Now, if we go into relationships and show up in the same way with self-abandoning behavior, we might have a tendency to avoid conflict, right? We ignore what's going on in ourselves in order to keep the peace between us and our partner, or do that in order to keep our partner happy, right? And we might say things like, it's okay, or just kind of ignore things and brush over things when we actually have a truth or feelings around the situation, but we're not prepared to bring them up and show our truth and honesty. Now, it's kind of normal to people please and have a bit of a fear of rejection, but in relationship, this is really damaging to healthy intimacy. But I understand it's sometimes necessary to take one for the team. Perhaps your partner is needing you to show up for them more than for them to show up for you, and you've got to do this sometimes. I'm also not suggesting that you should be self-focused all the time. Like, I'm not encouraging self-indulgence, but being self-abandoning means that you're actually not being present in the relationship, right? We want to have two people that are co-creating the reality together, and that requires both people to show up with all their parts so that each other can know each other fully and work with that dynamic. Sometimes we can't bring ourselves to the table, like work is super hectic, right? Your partner's needs are higher than usual, and that's perfectly normal. But what I'm talking about today and what I'll unpack today is a lifelong chronic pattern of self-abandonment where you actually feel like you kind of don't know who you are, particularly when it comes to relationships, right? You might have all the other areas in your life going really well, but when it comes to intimacy, when it comes to relationship, you just kind of lose yourself. And also you might be in this pattern if you find you obsess with new partners. You get really swept up in the newness of the chemistry and you kind of create a bit of a fantasy rather than being embodied in this dating process. And if this is something you tend to do, I have a whole video on love addiction that I'd love you to watch after this. Now, if you have a lifelong pattern of unhealthy relationships, like you always seem to be codependent in relationships, you can't set boundaries, you avoid conflict, do all those things, or you chase your partner, right? Your partner might be a bit ambivalent or have like one foot out the door, and you find yourself, you're kind of like getting their approval, or maybe you're just waiting for the other shoe to drop and you're just kind of really insecure in the relationship. That's another pattern to show that you might be self-abandoning. And another big pattern is if you tend to be the caretaker in a relationship, right? You attract people that need looking after, or people that need rescuing, right? Like a project partner, someone that needs working on. Now, the reason this is self-abandoning is because the part of you that actually craves love, craves being looked after, feels like, I really want to receive this. This is a part of you that's been completely axed off, right? Because you've chosen a relationship where you're never having your needs in that way met, okay? And you're always kind of having to like ignore that, like, oh, I don't need to worry about that, or I'm getting enough out of this relationship as it is, when in fact your needs aren't being met effectively. And this comes from a deeper part of you, which I'll unpack in a minute, that doesn't actually feel like you deserve love, that you deserve healthy intimacy. Now, when we kind of acts off this part of us in this self-abandoning pattern, what happens is that part is going to eventually protest, right? What we push down will eventually come out. And we've been pushing it down because we don't want to deal with it. And so what you might find is you're kind of like trying to hold things together, and then all of a sudden you just completely burst out. Like you get totally overwhelmed, you snap, you get frustrated. It's this part of you that just is screaming, right? It's been speaking to you and you've been ignoring it up until now. Or another thing can happen is that part of you, because it's not able to be heard, it's going to actually kind of like make you start to self-soothe in a way. You'll start to overeat. You'll start to be a little bit addictive towards things, right? You'll do other things to ignore the fact that these needs aren't being met. And it's kind of like a distraction. It's a soothing mechanism. And it's actually this part that's really needing your attention. It's really feeling hurt and abandoned by you. And some of you might know this part to be called the inner child or inner children. And we've got lots of little inner parts, but whatever this part of you that's super, super unhappy and not having their needs met is trying to speak out, and you've got maladaptive ways to deal with it because you're not actually bringing it to the light and focusing on it. Resisting your truth, resisting your realness, what you really need, resisting your needs. It is extremely exhausting, right? And you can only do it for so long, which is why you eventually snap. It can cause really high stress. You're kind of in fight flight all the time because you're constantly trying to keep that part at bay and focus on the other things. And, it's kind of like trying to hold yourself together, right? Now, I want to dive into the attachment origin of this because it's going to make a little bit more sense when we understand how this part or these parts have come to be formed. So the origin story of self-fracturing or self-abandonment comes from our nature in childhood. When we were growing up in our family of origin, we needed connection for survival. It was as essential as eating, breathing, and shelter, right? So connection was that important to us. Now, if our caretakers were able to hold a safe space for us to process our emotions and mature internally, and they were really good role models and mirrors for us, these parts of us become integrated into the mature self as we grow. But what often happens is we have caretakers who take all the attention up. They don't know how to hold a safe space for you or your emotional parts. And we then don't learn this process of self-adoption, which is where we're able to own our own needs and our own feelings and experiences whilst being present for others. And I'm going to show you a tool later on to learn how to do this. 50% of the population actually don't learn how to do this, and this is a form of insecure attachment because when you're young, you're so focused on the external world around you because there's so much going on. Your caregiver's taking up all the attention. There's no time to learn these internal skills, right? So you stay externally focused, you're seeking external validation, and you're placing higher importance and weight on others' opinions opinions and words than your own opinions and words. So you don't end up feeling safe to be seen and to be heard. So you really start to shut down and axe these parts of yourself off from an early age. Now, empathy plays into it. If you're watching my channel, chances you are an empath. I certainly am. And empaths feel their environment around them more sensitively than those that aren't. So we become wired to be in tune, hyper attuned to our external environment and to be focused externally. So a lot of empaths don't actually know the internal climate of their environment because they are so focused on their external environment. And we do actually put that skill to good use. It becomes a really useful skill for us to get by when we're in our early childhood and our friendships at school, like being an empath, being able to be a listener and be kind and caring and considerate. All those things are great skills to have, but it is a conditioned response that we've had, and we don't get to learn our internal selves. Now, if you've had a really volatile or insecure childhood, you actually had to focus on your external environment in order to be safe. So it can be wired at the level of biological safety, this kind of trauma response, which is effectively what self-abandonment is, right? When you're in fight or flight, or when you're fawning, or there's hypervigilance there, it actually affects your nervous system. You experience chronic stress, chronic physical issues, as well as what I've mentioned, this kind of lack of self-identity. You feel like you're missing a piece in life, like there should be more, and you're wired to only experience love and validation from the external environment, from others, and not the self. Now, if you want a really good video on how to start learning to love yourself, what self-love is, I'd love you to watch this video after this one next. Now, we also don't learn boundaries, right? Because the actual need for us to be safe in the environment is for us to not have boundaries. We learn to just kind of enmesh with our caregivers around us. We don't learn self-care. We don't learn discipline around this. And our internal happiness becomes dependent on others around you. You have no control over your own happiness because it's dependent on people around you. And our body is wired for these kinds of interactions with others. And this can cause addiction, right? We can become addicted to getting happy chemicals from people around us rather than from within us. Now, it's really important to know that it is not okay to give all of yourself to another in relationship. And I know a lot of people talk about, you've got to give 100% of yourself to your partner. I just really don't believe this, right? Some of our needs can never be met by anyone else except ourselves, right? Our partner can never meet all of our needs. We've got to learn how to meet a number of our needs, right? Particularly if we're not in relationship, we've got to learn how to meet quite a lot of our needs. And then when we move into relationship, we've got to know the difference between what is a healthy need to ask to be met and what is something that we can meet ourselves. And this is actually just a point of like emotional intelligence, right? It's us being connected to ourselves and knowing ourselves and then guiding others to show us how to love us. So that's actually how the health of a relationship is formed, when we have that kind of healthy intimacy with ourselves. If we don't do that, if we just continue these self-abandoning patterns, these can wreak absolute havoc in a relationship, because you've probably heard of the term codependency. This is where you're relying on another person in order to meet all of your needs, in order to get all of your validation, all of your support, everything, because you are just lacking this internal self-support system. And in my past, when I've been this partner, I've had feedback from other partners that it's like, I don't even know you, right? You're just not showing up in this kind of full self. And there's just no healthy intimacy because I wasn't allowing myself to be fully seen and heard and loved in that way. Now, let's unpack why these parts are hidden. I've kind of alluded to it, that we've pushed them down and we've kind of compartmentalized them in order to survive, whatever that survival environment was in our childhood, and then we continue to learn how to do that in our adulthood. And it's kind of a way that we deal with inattention, because if something comes up on the inside, we don't feel good about something, or we know that something someone said to us is wrong, that creates an inattention that requires a boundary in order for it to be resolved around us. And if we don't have those skills, we have that inattention, we just don't know what to deal with it, so we push it down. We don't know how to process any strong emotions that come up, and we kind of keep parts of us in the darkness, hidden, and that's why we call, this kind of subconscious work shadow work, because it is effectively in the shadow of the psyche. Now, when I I was doing this in my kind of self-abandoning patterns that went on for over a decade, I remember really willfully ignoring the truth. Like on some level, I knew that what was going on was wrong. I wasn't showing up well in relationships, you know, I think I was the problem, but I stayed in the victim mindset as a bit of a defense mechanism, right? I just like to have that kind of storyline to protect my ego, right? I focused on the external circumstances as the problem. So I'd blame a partner. You know, if a relationship didn't work out, it'd be like, well, it's because I haven't met the right partner yet, or it's their fault if the relationship fails because of what they said. There was no sense of personal responsibility being taken, even though deep down I knew that I was out of integrity with myself. I just didn't know what to do with it. I didn't know how to handle it. And interestingly, the glue that held my kind of internal split in place, like this part of me that I'd kind of shoved off and was ignoring, the glue was shame. It was internalized shame that I'd been feeling about myself from a very, very early age, right? Shame that I was the reason I got sent to my room. Shame I was the reason that my parents were acting a certain way. Shame I was the reason I lost a friend or the relationship broke down. Really deep down shame. And that was what I was kind of protecting, because I had this deep belief that there was something really wrong or really broken about me, right? Shame was what kept those parts hidden and was what kept my mask of telling, you know, myself and the world that it was everyone else's problem and I wasn't the problem at all. There's another aspect to this as well, and I really want to acknowledge that for those of you that identify being woman or identify with feminine energy, we are socialized as women to self-abandon. Women are socially conditioned to be caregivers, to, you know, be selfless. It's seen as a mark of dignity to give everything to your family and your partner, and, you know, I don't need anything because I've just got, you know, I'm just kind of giving it all out to everyone else. And, you know, women can be shamed if they don't meet that role in that way. Right now, in my parents' generation, it was seen as quite selfish for women to do self-care or to consider the self or even pursue a career, right? But what it does is it creates this kind of internal gap or hole in a woman when she's really not filling her own cup. And then what, you become more hyper-focused on your kids, on your partner, on work. And rather than filling yourself first to overflow onto them, it's kind of like you're chasing this goal that never seems to really truly fulfill you. And it's not because the things around you aren't fulfilling. It's because you've self-abandoned parts of you that really need nurturing and nourishment in order to kind of like complete the cycle for you. Now, this level of self-intimacy and knowledge is obviously new generationally, but if you want to know more about how to heal self-abandonment, I have a complete guide that you can download by clicking the link below if you feel stuck in your patterns. Now, it has a 60-day self-love plan to learn actually how to get the discipline of self-love going in your life, and it will show you how to embody your true self. So after the video, just head down to the download link and click on it there. So how do we actually go about healing self-abandonment? This is a really important piece, obviously, and I like for you to walk away with some concrete steps to actually get started on working on your healing journey in this way. It's really important for you to know that every time you self-abandon, you send your inner child a message that you aren't good enough. And no amount of external validation can soothe the damage of that message you are giving yourself internally. So there are two aspects of healing self-abandonment, and the most important aspect is the internal aspect. It's your relationship you have to yourself, to your inner child, to all those parts of you that are coming up. So firstly, just acknowledge within yourself the parts of your life that you really aren't fully showing up. Don't feel shame about it, because this is such a common thing for people to do. We all self-abandon to a degree, and you'll become aware of different levels of self-abandonment as well, and the awareness allows you to move forward and heal. So get really truthful within yourself. What people or relationships in your life are draining you, are not feeding you, that are sending you into a bit of a false part of who you are in order to meet them in that place, right? Those kinds of relationships that aren't reciprocal, they don't give back as well as take from you. What situations in your life, your job, what things do you do that also aren't kind of giving you that sense of fulfillment when you do them? And you get to make decisions that are for you, right? You have choice and control in your life. And obviously when you start to set boundaries and start to make decisions to show up for yourself, there's going to be some friction created where people who are used to you not having boundaries, and they've really benefited from that, and all of a sudden you have boundaries, they're going to not like it. But you've got to be prepared to stand up for yourself and your relationship to yourself more than trying to please and have relationships with others, because actually at the end of the day, the people who are worth being in relationship with are the ones that really honor and respect you when you show up for yourself and you can explain and express that. So own your life and create it from this perspective. And the way I really like to think of this is, say, I really want to heal my relationship to that wounded inner child I have inside, and I think of my higher self as an internal parent inside. What does this youngest part of me need in this moment, and how can I tend to them right now? Or how can I set a boundary that really looks after them? Or what choices can I make in my life that will allow this part of me just to feel a bit more safety, acknowledgement, and love and worth? So imagine this part of you, imagine you're actually in that age, whether it's 3 or 4 or 5 years, and someone's speaking to this part of you in a really awful or rude way, perhaps even the way that you speak to yourself. And your parent walks in, sees this happening and says, "You are not allowed to speak to my child that way. It is not okay. They deserve love and respect, and if you can't do that, you need to leave." Imagine your inner parent telling your inner child. Imagine how loved and valued and respected you would feel in that scenario. And imagine that that is what you are doing internally to anyone around you that is disrespecting this little, small, young, underdeveloped 3-year-old inside of you. That is what your inner parent needs to do in life. Now, the second aspect of healing is healing your external world, which is how you interact with the world and the kinds of relationships and dynamics that you have with them. You've got to shift your internal dynamic when you're with others. So at the moment, what's probably happening is when you're with someone, you're hyper-focused on what's going on with them. It's kind of like you're not even there, or you're hardly thinking about yourself at all. What you need to start doing is bringing yourself and self-awareness into the context when you're in relationship with them. And I'm going to give you a tool in a minute as to how to do that. But know that, of course, boundary setting is probably one of the best skills you can start to allow yourself that kind of separation of this is where I end and where you begin. So the tool that I want to teach you is called the 50-50 rule, and I've taught this on a couple of my videos on this channel. You need to learn how to take into account both you and the other person. So imagine the space between you and the other person accounts for 100% of the space that's being taken up in an interaction. 50% of that space belongs to them, and 50% of that space belongs to you. All right? So what you need to do is, in that 50% for yourself, is to stay present with your truth, stay present with how you're feeling and what's going on, as well as acknowledging what's going on for them, right? That conversation, or what they might be opening up to you about, or what they need, or what they're saying, right? We don't want to axe off our reality and our experience when we're in this kind of conversation. So a way to start doing this is to practice with other people, telling the truth as often as possible. Give yourself space when someone asks for a reaction from you. Just say, just need a minute, or go away and come back, whatever that looks like, just to give yourself space to get back into that internal process, that first part of the healing that I talked about earlier. Now, start with the safest relationships, right? Start with your close friends, or if you have close family, wonderful. Start by just being with them, being in conversation with them, and opening up more, just noticing more how I feel in response to that. You could even do an exercise that I do sometimes where that person speaks and then you get a chance to tell them what your experience of them speaking was like and what was coming up for you, and they witness that. It's a really beautiful witnessing exercise. But when you're with other people, notice how you feel in your body, notice your needs and your desires and your whatever spontaneous things come up. Notice them and express them if you want to. Don't allow that other person to take up 75 or 95% of the conversation. It's going to feel uncomfortable at first because you're used to just kind of sitting back and letting other people just kind of do whatever they need to do or say whatever they need to say, and you kind of like deal with your stuff later on, right? We've got to learn this new skill of bringing ourselves to the table. But what you'll notice is the more truth you tell, the more you acknowledge your own truth, the more safe you're going to feel in your body, because those smaller parts of you, those other parts that you normally axe off, are going to feel like you're actually showing up for them. That brings about a huge amount of internal peace that no amount of external validation will ever soothe, as I mentioned. So stand up for your truth. Stand up if you're being mistreated, or there's someone who's being rude, or they're coercing you into trying to do something, particularly when it's family. Stand up for yourself and just say no. No is a complete sentence, right? And recognize a part of you that wants to like mask up and like meet them in that place, right, where you kind of axe off those parts of you that you just don't want to deal with in the moment. Just recognize that when it happens, and know that that part of you is an essential part of you for survival in childhood, but it no longer serves you now in healthy, intimate adult relationships and friendships. It's holding you back now. And know that people who don't respond well to you shining your light and being more authentic, you just don't want those people in your life. You want to surround yourself by people who light up more when you light up. So really notice and gather data on how people around you respond when you really step more into your authentic self. And ironically, people are more drawn to people that are authentic. When we try and like put on a mask or try and be the way we think someone else wants us to be, that's just our mind thinking that that's what they want. But ironically, people really do respond to authenticity. Now, if you want more information on how I healed my self-abandonment and the steps that I went through, I have a webinar that takes you step by step through the 3 phases I did to create healthy self-love after my toxic relationship ended. I give you all my story and my info there. You can join that webinar at the link below. I also have a free Facebook group. I would love to see you in there. I often do lives and I'm often in there as well. And if you would like to grab that guide, just click the download link below. And if you would like to submit an application for Heal Your Heart School, my calendar link is in the description below as well. Please comment if you have any questions. I will be in the comments below. Click the like button because that will really help me and this channel out in the algorithm. And here are some follow-on videos to help you move one step closer to having a beautiful relationship with yourself and in your life. And I will see you in the next video.